People can be truly despicable. Throughout my career dealing with countless crimes, I've encountered all sorts of individuals, but today's perpetrator brings one word to mind: vile. You might find it difficult to hear this story through to the end. This person is an absolute degenerate with no place in society. The time, just after midnight, May 13th, 2009. A distressed call came into the police station in Yeongam County, South Jeolla Province. A young woman, her voice trembling, reported that she had been sexually assaulted by her own father and was currently locked in the house. She managed to make the call while he briefly stepped out to buy cigarettes. Police rushed to the scene and apprehended a 43-year-old man named Lee Hyang-yeol. This horrific excuse for a father turned out to be not just a monstrous abuser, but also harbored far more terrible secrets. After his arrest, a police investigation began, revealing that his past was even more horrifying. It was discovered that Lee Hyang-yeol was a serial offender who had been repeatedly convicted of sexual crimes over the past 17 years and had served time in prison. However, he had not changed in the slightest and continued his malevolent deeds whenever he was free. Moreover, thanks to his daughter's testimony, numerous other previously hidden crimes came to light. It turned out that he was a serial killer. Lee Hyang-yeol was born in 1966, and his family history was far from normal. His parents, both from previous marriages, came together and had him in their new union. As a result, he grew up with half-siblings. Unfortunately, conflicts among the children were common, leading to a childhood marred by depression for Lee Hyang-yeol. Raised in a poor family, Lee Hyang-yeol only completed elementary school before starting work in a factory. From his teenage years, he began exhibiting an interest in the opposite sex. This interest was excessive. From an early age, he frequented nightclubs and every week found new girls for fleeting encounters. In 1984, when he turned 18, he began living with a 16-year-old underage girl named Kim. Perhaps due to the unstable childhood he experienced in a dysfunctional family, Lee Hyang-yeol yearned to create a complete family of his own. He decided to settle down and started building a life together with Kim. 2 years passed, and the young woman found herself pregnant. But it was precisely at this moment that troubles began to brew. Unable to engage intimately with his wife, he couldn't control his urges and turned to crime. On January 27, 1987, Lee Hyang-yeol attacked a 16-year-old schoolgirl, threatening her with a knife, and then raped her. Fortunately, the crime was quickly solved, and Lee Hyang-yeol was sentenced to 2 years and 6 months in prison. While he was incarcerated, Kim gave birth to their child and struggled to make ends meet, a daunting task for her family. Her parents found it hard to accept that their daughter was involved with a criminal. Kim's mother and brother kept urging her that she was still young and could find a better man. Eventually, Kim decided to change her life. She met a man named Yoon, started a relationship with him, and got married. Yoon even adopted the child Kim had with Lee, officially registering the child under his own name. Upon hearing this news in prison, Lee Hyang-yeol was furious. As soon as he was released, he vowed to take revenge on Mrs. Kim and his family, whom he believed had instigated her against him. Shortly after his release, he found himself back on the streets. He was given another 2 years and 6 months, likely regaining his freedom in July 1989. However, roughly a year later, in June 1991, he was arrested once again for a new crime. This time, he was charged with holding a 15-year-old schoolgirl from the same village captive and raping her 3 times. During the ordeal, he threatened the victim with a masonry tool and then staged a kidnapping, demanding 200,000 won from her family. Thankfully, he was apprehended again, and this time he received a 15-year prison sentence. Due to his prior convictions, the punishment was more severe. Altogether, he spent 17 years behind bars. But did he manage to rehabilitate in prison? Regrettably, subsequent events suggest otherwise. Finally, in October 2005, Lee Hyang-yeol was released and found employment at a shipbuilding company in Yeongam County, Jeolla Province. 2 years later, in 2007, memories of the daughter he had fathered with Miss Kim unexpectedly resurfaced. In his quest to uncover her fate, he began gathering information and eventually paid a visit to Kim's mother, his former mother-in-law. It was there he received unexpected news. Kim had divorced Yoon, the man she had married after divorcing him, and they were now living apart. Once he had harbored resentment toward Kim for leaving him and swiftly marrying another. Back then, he was engulfed in a silent rage, nurturing dreams of revenge, imagining a day when fate would make her regret her choice. However, as is often the case, time brought changes. Learning about the disarray in her new marriage, he unexpectedly felt not schadenfreude, but something else. A strange, subtle yearning for the past. Instead of reveling in her misfortunes, he began seeking excuses to communicate, to reconnect with his former wife Kim. Regardless of the circumstances, eventually, the two reunited. By this time, Mrs. Kim already had a daughter from her first marriage to Lee Hyang-yeol, as well as a daughter from her second marriage to Mr. Yoon. Thus, she now had two daughters. A new family was formed: Lee Hyang-yeol, Mrs. Kim, their shared daughter, and stepdaughter, all living under one roof. They each hoped for a long and happy life together. But in February 2009, the seemingly peaceful life began to unravel. Lee Hyang-yeol lost his job, plunging the family into a tough financial situation. The atmosphere at home grew tense. Arguments between Lee Hyang-yeol and his wife Kim became more frequent. It was during this time that Lee Hyang-yeol's old resentment and thirst for vengeance against Kim reignited. However, this hatred turned against an entirely innocent person. On May 5, 2009 at midnight, Lee Hyang-yeol had a visitor in his home. It was his wife's niece, the daughter of Mrs. Kim's elder brother. To Lee Hyang-yeol, she was akin to a relative by marriage. The 16-year-old girl, whom we will call A, was staying over and likely referred to him as uncle. That night, Lee Hyang-yeol accidentally saw her changing in her room. He was seized by a vile sexual desire, and overpowering her resistance, dragged A into the bedroom where he assaulted her. During this horrific crime, he struck his niece multiple times on the face and chest. Having failed to conquer his inner demons, and once again committing a violent crime driven by sexual motives, Lee Hyang-yeol reached a grim resolve that he could never face imprisonment again. A ghastly plan took shape in his mind. He decided to end the life of his niece, a young woman named A. He acted swiftly and without hesitation. First, he sealed her mouth with tape and bound her hands and feet. Then, placing her inside a travel bag, he loaded her into the trunk of his car. He set off toward the nearest forest, intending to bury her body there. However, when he opened the trunk, he found that A was already lifeless. He discarded the bag containing her body into a pre-dug grave and covered it with earth. After this, Lee embarked on a series of actions to cover his tracks. First, he disposed of her bag and sneakers, tossing them into a pile of trash by the roadside. Then, to create an alibi, he deliberately stopped at a roadside cafe where he purchased a drink. Later, he headed to a dam in Hannam, where he took up fishing to establish evidence of his whereabouts. Meanwhile, A's family realized she was missing, and panic ensued. And what was Lee Hyang-yeol doing during this time? He went straight to the nearest police station, where he anxiously declared himself as A's uncle and filed a missing person report, feigning concern. But Lee Hyang-yeol didn't stop there. To create the impression that A had run away, he arranged for a new mobile phone. Using it, he masqueraded as A, sending messages to her family. "I'm okay, don't worry. It's enough to send shivers down your spine." Just a week after the crime, on May 12th, at 5 in the evening, the next incident occurred. That day, he was left alone with his stepdaughter, 19-year-old Yoon, whom he had been raising after marrying her mother, Mrs. Yoon. The stepdaughter was lying on the couch in the living room, and Lee Hyang-yeol began to nag. "Hey, why aren't you cleaning or doing the dishes just lying there?" Yoon replied, "Why should I do it?" and headed to her room. This could have easily been just another ordinary family spat, but something in Lee Hyang-yeol snapped. He grabbed her by the throat and began to beat her mercilessly. Yoon was in shock, trying desperately to fight back, but he was relentless. Not only did he not stop, but he also subjected her to a horrific sexual assault. Then, with chilling swiftness, he strangled her. This marked his second murder in just a week. It was a terrifying escalation of violence from Lee Hyang-yeol. And what did he do afterwards? That very day, around 8 in the evening, Lee headed to a restaurant at Tongyong Station where Miss Kim worked. They had dinner together there. After their meal, Lee offered Miss Kim a ride, taking her to a deserted alley near an elementary school. In the car, they had sex, and as soon as it was over, Lee's demeanor shifted dramatically, leaving her with the chilling words, "I love you so much, I want to kill you." He strangled Kim. But he didn't stop there. It seemed as though it wasn't enough for him, and he used a cable found in the car to ensure she was dead. His actions appeared driven by pure rage. Afterwards, Lee moved Kim's body to the trunk of his car. By that time, he had already committed 3 murders in the span of a week. Lee Hyang-yeol decided to take it even further and set out to destroy Kim's entire family. He was convinced that her relatives had influenced his wife to betray him while he was imprisoned. A bit later, just after midnight, he headed to Mokpo, where Kim's older brother lived. There also resided Kim's 18-year-old niece, B, who was the sister of Lee's first victim. A young woman named Lee Hyang-yeol told B, "Your aunt really wants to see you. She's planning to give you some pocket money." When they arrived in Mokpo, Lee met with B and took her home. There, around 1 in the morning, he revealed his true nature. Threatening his niece B with a knife, he violated her and then locked her in a closet. 2 hours passed, and at 3 a.m., his own daughter A returned home after finishing her night shift at an internet cafe. She too fell victim to her father's crimes. He gagged her with tape, tied her hands and feet with pantyhose, and declared, "I've killed everyone. I'll kill you too, and then I'll make an effort to leave this world." Then, Lee Hyang-yeol began recounting his past crimes to his daughter, claiming he had killed niece A, stepdaughter Yun, and even Kim's mother. Strangely, by morning, he changed his mind and freed his daughter from her bonds. However, his behavior remained grotesque. He asked her to shower with him, citing it as his last wish. It was revolting. He forced his daughter to change into her underwear and filmed it, then violated her as well. But the story doesn't end there, for they were not the only ones in the house. Locked in the closet was the victim, a girl named B. Niece B. Time passed, and as the next midnight arrived, Lee Hyang-yeol suddenly decided to leave the house on the pretext of buying cigarettes. It was at this moment that his daughter, barely managing to gather her strength, called the police, leading to the arrest of Lee Hyang-yeol, the dreadful serial assailant. The situation could have ended in tragedy. Both niece B and his own daughter could have perished. It was like an explosion of his brutality. When Lee Hyang-yeol was apprehended, he began spinning ridiculous excuses. How can one justify such actions? The first thing he said about his murdered niece A was that she supposedly seduced him. What nonsense! He claimed he had a happy family, but A threatened to destroy it, and that's why he killed her. It's infuriating. Regarding his own daughter, he stated that he initially hadn't planned on assaulting her, but while he had either killed or assaulted all his other victims, he supposedly spared her because he feared she might be harassed in the future. What nonsense is that? Listening to these excuses is unbearable. In October 2009, Lee Hyang-yeol stood before the court and once again spun another brazen lie. "If I met the victim again, I might kill her once more," he declared. Clearly, he felt no remorse whatsoever. The judge and prosecutor were so appalled by his cynicism that they could scarcely hide their astonishment. Ultimately, Lee Hyang-yeol was sentenced to death for murder, aggravated rape, assault, and violation of the Youth Protection Act. This case is truly shocking. However, despite the gravity of the situation, Lee Hyang-yeol filed an appeal. He claimed that everything happened due to his difficult and unstable family background in the past. Moreover, he attempted to justify his actions by stating that Kim from Dongjin Station had betrayed him and got married, which, in his view, was sufficient reason for his anger. But these explanations were completely dismissed. Even on appeal, the sentence remained unchanged: death. In April 2010, after many months of legal proceedings, the sentence was finally upheld. Now, 12 years later, Lee Hyang-yeol is still in prison, awaiting the execution of his sentence. He should never be allowed to walk free again, as the victims of this crime were his own relatives. This man killed his wife and daughter, with whom he lived, and committed horrific sexual violence. It should be remembered that before committing his latest crime, he had already served 17 years in prison. However, upon release, he committed even more dreadful crimes, which is all the more terrifying. Shouldn't those 17 years have been enough to reform him? Were they truly worthless? We often feel relief when a criminal is caught, but the process should not end there. We need to ensure that the criminal has atoned for their crimes and truly reformed before re-entering society. And if rehabilitation is impossible, if there are such cruel individuals among criminals, then they should be isolated forever. It might seem like stating the obvious, but there is a real concern that society could overlook this crucial necessity. Measures must be taken to ensure that Lee Hyang-yeol never returns to society under any circumstances, even if it means carrying out a death sentence. Don't go anywhere. The second story is about to begin. On January 9th, 2008, at a police station in Dunedin, New Zealand, a phone call came in. "Right now, my daughter is being sexually assaulted." The mother, whose name was Leslie Elliott, was pounding on the locked bedroom door, desperately trying to open it. The dispatcher alerted nearby officers to hurry to the scene. Shortly after, the caller declared, "My daughter Sophie has been killed." and the call ended. A few minutes later, when officers arrived at the house, they found a middle-aged woman sitting in the yard, completely overwhelmed. It was Leslie Elliott, the person who had called the police. On seeing them, she sobbed that her daughter had been murdered in the second-floor bedroom. The police entered at once, and a short time later, they brought out a man who had emerged under their escort. The perpetrator arrested at the scene was 33 years old, a man named Clayton Weatherston. He was the victim's former boyfriend. The officers who discovered Sophie's body were shocked by its devastating condition, to the point that they briefly shut their eyes. They were furious. How could someone do this to another human being? They advised Leslie, who wanted to see her daughter, "Ma'am, we recommend that you do not look. It will bring you more suffering for the rest of your life." She broke down further, wailing, "I should never have let him in," and began blaming herself for everything. First, let us examine Sophie's relationship with Clayton. They began dating 1 year earlier, in 2007. Clayton, then in his 30s, was an economics instructor at a local university, and Sophie was a student there, soon to graduate. He was popular among both colleagues and students. His lectures were considered excellent, and he was described as warm-hearted, active, and sporty. Sophie also felt attracted to him once she started taking his classes. At that time, however, Clayton had a girlfriend. Superficially, that relationship looked intact, but behind the scenes, she was waiting for her chance to run away from him. She was the only person who truly knew the side of Clayton that he kept hidden from the world. Contrary to his glowing reputation, he was prone to sudden rage and frequent violent outbursts. He was emotionally unstable and self-centered, tormented by the idea that everything had to be absolutely perfect at all times. If things strayed even slightly from what he wanted, he became consumed with anger and lashed out violently. His then-girlfriend had feared for her life on several occasions. Eventually, she freed herself from his grasp and left him. Now single, Clayton swiftly grew close to Sophie, a student 10 years his junior. Their age gap did not really matter. Clayton still seemed caring, and Sophie fell hard for the more mature man she believed him to be. At some point, an unexpected hurdle arose. Sophie was preparing to graduate, and she found employment in Wellington, about 800 kilometers away from Dunedin, where she lived. She had been hired by the New Zealand Treasury, an excellent opportunity by any measure. Sophie decided to move to Wellington for the sake of her future. Clayton strongly objected, insisting, "I had a long-distance relationship once before, and it was terrible. It made me so anxious I had to take antidepressants." He pleaded with her not to go. Sophie did understand his concerns, but that did not mean she would give up her bright future. She tried her best to reassure and comfort him. In hindsight, it must have been exhausting for a woman in her early 20s to placate a man a decade older in such a way. Still, wanting to ease his feelings, she put together a photo album of the two of them, a keepsake of their bond. On December 27, 2007, she brought it to Clayton's home. There, the two began arguing again about her move. Clayton raised his voice, getting angrier and louder. Sophie thought, "He is not listening today," and announced, "We can talk another time. I am leaving." She tried to walk out, and at that moment, Clayton's violent impulse kicked in. He grabbed Sophie by the back of her neck and threw her onto the bed. It was the first time she had experienced violence from him. Shocked, she screamed, "What are you doing?" Clayton covered her mouth with one hand, then with the other, repeatedly struck her with a force unimaginable between lovers. He completely lost his grip on reason, and soon he was even strangling her. Luckily, Sophie managed to wriggle free and run away from the house, barely escaping with her life. That was the end of their relationship, but Clayton refused to accept it, growing ever more unstable. 3 days before the crime, he had already been taking an antidepressant known as Prozac, but now he increased the dosage to 3 pills per day. 3 days passed, and then the date of the incident arrived, his birthday. Friends offered him congratulations. but he was still deeply depressed. At some point, he opened the online platform known as Facebook to view Sophie's photographs. They had broken up and were no longer communicating, but he searched for images of her. He then found a recent post stating that Sophie was leaving for Wellington the following day. At that, something within him snapped. Meanwhile, Sophie was at home with her mother, Leslie, packing up her belongings for the move. She was planning a pizza farewell with friends that afternoon. Sophie showered, picked out clothes, and felt excitement for her new start. Her mother, feeling bittersweet at their last day together in the house, was nostalgic and sad. Sophie hugged her mother and reassured her, "Do not feel bad, Mom. I will come home often." Cruelly, that embrace became their final moment together. A short while later, around 12:30, the doorbell rang. It was Clayton, an uninvited guest. He said he had a final message for Sophie and something to give her. Sophie still felt traumatized by his earlier violence, but it was her last day in Dundon, and she softened. She let Clayton inside and went upstairs with him to her room. Leslie watched them go up to the second floor and felt a surge of anxiety. She wanted to throw him out immediately. After all, this was the man who had hit her daughter, but decided to respect Sophie's choice. About 5 minutes passed. Sophie came down alone to the living room and told her mother, "Clayton is just sitting there, not saying a word. I have no idea what he wants," expressing confusion. Leslie responded, "You have done enough. Send him away now." Sophie nodded and went back upstairs. Then, within moments, a piercing scream erupted from the room. Alarmed, Leslie raced to the second floor, but the bedroom door was locked. She called the police for help, all the while pounding on the door and hearing her daughter's cries from inside, along with loud thuds. Leslie believed Sophie was being sexually assaulted. Panicking, she ran downstairs to the kitchen to grab something small and pointed, hoping to open the lock. Suddenly, her daughter's cries fell silent. Almost at the same moment, Leslie managed to unlock the door with the tool. What she saw inside was horrifying. The room was drenched in blood, and Clayton was crouched over Sophie's collapsed body, stabbing her repeatedly. With each thrust, Sophie's motionless body jerked slightly. She had already died by that point. Terrified, Leslie fled outside, calling for help. Police arrived a short time later. Rushing upstairs to save Sophie, they kicked in the door and discovered her lifeless body on the floor, while Clayton stood calmly next to it. He was eerily serene and composed. When an officer demanded, "What have you done?" he quietly admitted, "I killed Sophie." He even mentioned that the weapon lay beneath her body, and that he had also used a pair of scissors, offering detailed comments on what had happened. An autopsy of Sophie's body revealed approximately 200 stab wounds. Considering that the entire attack occurred within an extremely short time, he had managed to stab her around 200 times, shockingly ruthless. Moreover, the initial wounds targeted her heart, lungs, and neck, indicating that his primary goal was to kill her. Even after she died, Clayton kept mutilating her body. In an especially gruesome act, he used scissors to disfigure certain areas, including her cheeks, ears, eyes, and nose. He also tried to cut off some of her hair. One might imagine his deranged thought to be, "If I cannot have you, no one else can," leading him to destroy her in the most horrific way possible. Beyond the shocking brutality, the fact that this man murdered his ex-girlfriend in her own house while her mother was downstairs, and that her mother discovered the final state of her daughter, captured the attention of countless people. Public outcry was immense, and all of New Zealand awaited the outcome of the trial. In May 2008, Clayton's first trial began. He had confessed to the killing, so one might have assumed the legal process would be straightforward. Yet there was a twist. He suddenly claimed that this was manslaughter, not murder. According to him, yes, he had taken a knife with him, but not with the intent to kill. He insisted he carried it for self-defense, and that Sophie had supposedly attacked him first with scissors, insulting her mother in the process, knocking off his glasses, so he was only defending himself. However, how could he claim self-defense after inflicting 200 stab wounds? It made no sense. He then offered a further assertion. Sophie had briefly left the room, and during that time, he took out his knife. He remembered up to that point, but said he had consumed so much medication that he remembered nothing afterward. It was absurd. Crucially, Clayton ignored the presence of a third person, Sophie's mother, Leslie, who was in the house. Leslie testified that she had not heard any sounds of fighting from within the room. Also, Sophie had stepped into the living room at one point, telling her mother, "He is just sitting there," which contradicted Clayton's claims. Leslie's testimony was pivotal in exposing his lies. The trial stretched on, but in the end, Clayton was found guilty of murder and given a life sentence. Even then, he kept insisting he was being treated unfairly, arguing that the intense media coverage influenced the jury's decision. He also complained that using Sophie's photographs during the trial was biased, alleging that this stirred the jury's sympathies against him. His words garnered no sympathy. He appealed, but in 2009, 3 appellate judges reevaluated the case, and by June 2011, they upheld the original verdict and dismissed his appeal. Meanwhile, the person who suffered the greatest anguish from this crime was Sophie's mother. She witnessed her only daughter being murdered, mere steps away, yet felt she could do nothing from downstairs. That guilt, coupled with self-blame, believing she should have kicked Clayton out of the house long before, plagued her every moment. Leslie has said that Sophie was her only daughter, her friend, and her entire world, and that Clayton robbed them both of the precious time they once had and the future they should have shared. It was a heartbreakingly cruel outcome to the story.